Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. On this episode, we're taking a look at the surprising news that Central Asian countries are sending more migrant workers to Asia rather than their longtime economic pal, Russia. Moscow and other cities have gone from hosting millions of Central Asian workers to watching some of them wave goodbye and hop on flights bound for Tokyo, Seoul, and beyond. It's like your childhood best friend leaving you for the cool kid in class, only instead of lunch money, it's billions in remittances. So, without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
There currently is a tale unfolding in the part of the world between Russia and China. A story about people who had found better lives, but now those lives are being sapped away. As that life in Russia is crumbling, thousands of Central Asian migrants are finding themselves back home or scrambling for new options. Some in the West, some in East Asia, and some desperately clinging on to what they have in Russia. Some would say the Crocus City Hall attack in March last year was where it all fell apart for these migrants. Since then, Russia has banned entry for tens of thousands of Central Asian migrants, and a wider crackdown was imposed.
According to official statistics, only 3.5 to 4% of 100% of crimes committed in Russia are committed by migrants, including Tajiks in the country.
Public sentiment has also turned against them. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has made life even more difficult, and many of the migrants have refused conscription. Deportation is often how Moscow responds to these refusals.
It is expressed in slander and disrespect. Even in mosques, there were cases when people were taken away with their hands tied while praying.
Many of them are taking routes away from Russia and their home countries and are hoping for better lives in East Asia. South Korea is one such destination. Though here the Central Asian workers struggle with language barriers and cultural differences, the country's shaky political situation also doesn't help maintain stable jobs. Those who try their luck in the West are often scammed on the other hand. The promise of a nicely paying job in the United States, for example, is worth the risk of an upfront payment. Though too many times, these hopes are nothing but bait for sharks eager to take the money and give nothing in return.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. For years, Russia was the main magnet pulling in labor migrants from Central Asia. If you travel to Moscow, you'd find entire neighborhoods of Uzbek, Tajik, or Kyrgyz migrants. They fill construction sites, staff restaurants, and sometimes outnumbered actual Muscovites at certain markets. But with recent economic woes, sanctions, and let's call it complicated situation involving Russia's foreign policy, many Central Asian migrants are exploring new opportunities elsewhere. And by elsewhere, I mean East Asia, the Middle East, and beyond. Now, don't get me wrong, Russia is still a top destination, mainly because of established networks, language familiarity, and, historical ties. But the ruble has lost some of its sparkle. Plus, migrants do talk to each other. Hey, Russia's economy might not be the cash cow it once was. Also, my cousin found a great gig in Seoul, making triple the money. Word spread fast. It's like the hottest travel tip for your next vacation, only instead of sampling local cuisine, you're busting your back to send money back home. In the past decade, remittances from Russia to countries like Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan accounted for a significant chunk of their GDP. Think of it like a Netflix subscription. You might forget how much you rely on it until it's threatened. So if Netflix, in this case Russia, decides to double your subscription fees and cut half the shows you like, you might start eyeing other streaming platforms. And that's effectively what's happening. The rise in geopolitical risk and a less friendly business environment in Russia have turned more Central Asian eyes towards countries like Japan and South Korea, where wages are higher and the political climate is less likely to spontaneously combust. Now, you might be wondering, why East Asia? Well, first, these countries have booming economies and a thirst for labor, particularly in manufacturing, construction, and service industry. Now, that's not to say that this migration shift is a done deal. Russia's historically strong pull hasn't evaporated overnight, and plenty of families still rely on those ruble-based remittances. But what's happening is a diversification of options. Global migration is unbelievably fluid, shaped by economic incentives, cultural pull, and the occasional geopolitical fiasco. Central Asian countries are demonstrating a resilience and adaptability that might surprise some who think of them purely as Russia's backyard. It's a reminder that no geopolitical alliance is invincible and the only constant is change. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Bruce Pannier, board member of Caspian Policy Center. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So when talking about the topic of Central Asian labor's exodus of Russia, I think it's pretty obvious why they no longer want to be there, seeing that Russia's economy has been crashing, and along with the oppression, the juice is just no longer worth the squeeze. But what are some of the countries or regions that Central Asian laborers are looking at right now?
Well, it's been very interesting how this kind of developed after Russia launched its full-scale war on Ukraine. A lot of countries sensed that Central Asian migrant laborers anyway were going to be looking for another port in the storm, so to say. And so you've had a lot of people step up. Oddly, South Korea, which did have some Central Asian migrant laborers prior to 2022, but we're talking 10 to 20,000 maybe at the most. But they've been finding work for Central Asians now. They say they have job spaces open for 50, 70,000 Central Asian migrant laborers for a start, and that they're going to expand that later. So that's one country that's already kind of reached out to the Central Asian migrant laborer community and said, well, we want you. The Arab countries have really shown up. I mean, this was obviously a destination anyway, although there's a language problem, same with South Korea too. But obviously the Arab countries are attractive, especially a country like Saudi Arabia, because of the Islamic connection with the Central Asian migrant laborers, who are vast majority Muslims, of course. So there have been a lot of programs in places like Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, I already mentioned, the United Arab Emirates. They've all been advertising themselves as potential destinations for migrant laborers. And then we can't leave out Europe. I mean, Europe has really done a lot, especially Germany is talking about taking in tens of thousands of Central Asian migrant laborers. What they're looking for in the case of Germany is truck drivers, caregivers for elderly communities. Britain has hired a lot of Central Asian migrant laborers to come and do work in their agriculture sphere out there too, and also parts of Italy. Strangely, have been looking, especially the islands, the Italian islands in the Mediterranean, have been looking for sheep herders. Right now, this is not a job that you can find a great labor pool in a lot of places, but Kyrgyzstan was one country where they still have vast, or at least a lot of people are still herding sheep and up in the mountains doing that. And so, Italy's been advertising for Kyrgyz sheep herders to come and work in Italy. So there actually is probably altogether getting close to somewhere between 250,000 or 500,000 job openings in other countries now.
Wow, that sounds like a pretty significant number. Now, one of the countries that did kind of raise a little bit of, I want to use the word suspicion, what I'm looking for, kind of maybe quite curious, is South Korea. Because traditionally, when we look at South Asian countries looking for cheap immigration labor, mostly they come from Southeast Asia. So why Central Asia in particular? Is there any reason why this is a more competitive option compared to traditionally like Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam?
This calls a little bit for speculation on my part, but what I can say it's absolutely certain is the fact that there are Korean communities in Central Asia. This is not, it's a legacy of Stalin's mass deportations at the start of World War II. He didn't want Koreans in Siberia. So what he did was relocate them into places in Central Asia. So if you go to Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan, it's not very difficult, certainly in the big cities, to find a Korean population. So there's already a link there. Now the speculative part for me would be, why don't they hire other Asian laborers? And that might just come down to local prejudice of some sort or another. Anyway, the idea that they don't want other Southeast Asians or East Asians coming in to work there, and Central Asians are somewhat more desirable because they're not from the region. They readily stick out. There is the connection because of the Korean communities out there, but in the meantime, it's not, as you mentioned, Filipinos or Indonesians or somebody coming in. It's these Central Asians who are easily identifiable and presumably will one day want to go home. and won't stay there for their whole lives.
Right. And what about the European countries like Germany, like you mentioned? How are they planning on attracting laborers from this region to go and work in Germany? Is it just because they have a better salary?
Well, I mean, that's certainly part of it. You'd mentioned the problem with Russia, with the ruble going down, and even in the best of times, the pay in rubles is nowhere near what the pay in euros is probably going to be in a place like Germany or France or pounds in Great Britain. I mean, that's a lot more money that they're going to make there. It's interesting how the Germans have approached this too, because they're prepping them. I mean, one of the problems or one of the issues anyway with migrant laborers going to Russia was that Russia has increasingly insisted that all the migrant laborers that show up there are proficient in Russian. You wouldn't think that was that would be such a great demand, but it has been a whole generation that passed since the Soviet Union. So if you're an 18-year-old and you're looking to you need to find a job and you're looking at Russia, then you have to be able to speak good Russian. You probably haven't been exposed greatly to it, certainly not to the degree of your parents and grandparents were. But they insist that you know Russian. Now, the Germans have kind of taken a page from that and set up German language centers in the countries that they're offering labor migrants positions or making positions available to them. So the deal is that you can come and work in Germany, but before that, you have to go and study German language at one of these universities, one of these centers that they're setting up in Central Asia. Why Central Asians too? In the case of Germany, or even in the case of Europe, one thing again, when we look at the labor pool around the world and who you could choose to bring in as migrant laborers to your country, who would you let in? The Central Asians have a high degree of education. I mean, it's part of the legacy of the Soviet Union. The literacy rate's 97, 98% in all the Central Asian countries, so they are educated. I mean, your average Central Asian has at least a high school level education, and some of them are university trained too. The problem is employment in Central Asia. So you're not hiring you might hire them for unskilled labor jobs, but they are in fact skilled laborers if you need them, and a lot of them have backgrounds that are essential to what the Europeans and other countries are looking for. I mentioned in the case of Germany, caregivers, where you work with the elderly. If you have a basic medical background in Central Asia, this is an ideal job for you, and it works out for the Germans too, because people aren't taking those positions.
Man, that makes a lot of sense. And Mel, going back to the situation in Russia, we already see the economy going downhill. Do you think that this exodus of cheap immigration labor will further exacerbate the issue over there?
Oh, they're going to have a hard time. At the height, 10 years ago or something, when there was at least, unofficially anyway, the estimates were there was 8 million Central Asian migrant laborers in Russia, about half of them working legally there, registered and everything, and half just finding whatever kind of job they could, having gone across the border, which is easy to get across. That number has gone way, way down. How are you going to replace all those people? They're doing jobs that the average Russian is not going to do. Central Asians, they perform a wide variety of services in Russia. So I don't want to paint them all with the same brush, but generally, the stereotype Central Asian labor is a street sweeper, a construction worker, a delivery person, somebody like that, right? So, these aren't jobs that are going to be easy to fill. We've seen some tentative moves on Russia's part to try to figure out how they're going to fill this. Some of the African countries where Russia has the mercenary group, the Wagner group, is working. They've been able to pick some from there, but these people obviously don't know Russian, so it's even worse for them to work in Russia than it would be for Central Asians to work in Russia. So there's really no way that Russia is going to be able to replace the millions of Central Asian migrant laborers that have been working there. I don't know what they could do, actually. Salaries are not good. Racism is rampant. It's going to be tough.
Right. Speaking of racism being rampant, one of the rumors I heard that the Central Asian immigration labor are going to is actually Japan, which to me seems quite surprising, as we do know that is a country notorious for having an in-group bias, especially when it comes to the workplace. So is that a desirable place for the Central Asian laborers to be going?
Yeah, I would think absolutely. Again, the salary is one thing. The Japanese society is very different than Central Asia, and I think it's probably a welcome a welcome situation for the Central Asians to come, such an organized society, and I mean, clean streets, the way that people act behave toward one another and everything, very different than what happens in Central Asia. Again, there's kind of a link there that goes back. Now, there aren't many ethnic Japanese, obviously, in Central Asia. But Japan was really one of the first countries to come in and help out Central Asia substantially. It's kind of a shame that the Japanese don't take more credit than they do. They've been kind of under the radar, but they've consistently invested in roads, education programs, programs to help people with a disability. It goes on and on and on. And they've been there since, 1991, 1992. I've been following their progress, and they have done a lot for Central Asia. So there's definitely a good feeling. You see the C5 group. It's the 5 Central Asian presidents. They've been kind of moving around, touring, especially since Russia's full-scale invasion of Central Asia. So the C5 I've met with Biden a couple of years ago. They've met with the German leader. They've met with all kinds of people. That concept, the C5, was actually the Japanese. The Japanese formed the C5 plus 1 foreign minister group with their foreign minister and the 5 Central Asian foreign ministers, and that was 20 years ago that they started doing this. I mean, now it seems like something new, but it's actually the Japanese that came up with that. So they have a heavy presence in Central Asia, and they have had for a long time. Again, the fact that the Central Asians will stand out from the crowd in Japan is probably something that's pleasing to them. We know that the Japanese generally are not appreciative of outsiders, non-Japanese people coming in and staying there or working. However, they have an aging population, a declining birth rate, and somebody has to do some of these jobs. And I think it's probably comforting for them to know that they have someone coming in, again, educated people, willing to perform menial tasks if that's all they can get, and in the meantime, readily identifiable.
All right. Thank you so much for breaking this situation down for us. Thanks for your intrepid insight, and thanks for being with us on Eastern Express. Cheers.
Great. Always a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Both Ukraine and Russia have reportedly been making some serious advances across the front line. While Kyiv's forces have launched multiple attacks in the Kursk region, Russian troops are inching ever closer to Kharkiv.
Ukrainian sources say that Kyiv's attack on multiple fronts in the Kursk region has come as a surprise to the Russians stationed there. Ukrainian troops have targeted areas as close as 70 kilometers away from Kursk city itself. The region is considered a crucial card in the war, as experts believe that Kyiv could use its military presence there as a bargaining chip in any peace negotiations with Russia. Yet Moscow has not been idle in the face of this assault. Russian forces have advanced within 2 kilometers of Kupiansk in Ukraine, threatening a vital rail hub in the city. This also means that they are edging ever closer to the city of Kharkiv, which is Ukraine's second largest settlement. Should Russia capture Kupiansk, it would make it much easier for its armies to encircle and eventually conquer Kharkiv.
Ukrainian intelligence has reported some of the best news it has had in quite some time. In 2024, Kyiv was able to free 1,358 captives from Russia in various prisoner exchanges.
According to Ukrainian authorities, 2024's prisoner swaps with Russia were an unprecedented success. Last year, they were able to secure the release of 356 more Ukrainians than in 2023. Recent exchanges included the defenders of the famous Snake Island. Kyiv has also been able to significantly expand its support programs for the returning captives. Since the start of the Russian invasion in 2022, almost 4,000 Ukrainians have been released from Russian captivity. Thousands of soldiers and civilians alike are still in Moscow's hands, however. The reports about their condition have sparked outrage, as some of them have reportedly been held in inhumane conditions, including the use of torture and a lack of necessary medical aid. The exact number of remaining captives is unspecified, but Ukraine continues to negotiate their release.
The Russian-installed authorities in occupied Crimea have declared an emergency in Sevastopol over the recent oil spill. The substance has reportedly made its way ashore in the city and could be harmful to the residents.
The fallout from the oil spill caused by the damaging of 2 tankers in the Black Sea continues to haunt Crimea and the Russian coast. Despite the declaration of a state of regional emergency in Sevastopol, volunteers working in protective suits continue the cleanup operation to remove the substance from the shores. The two Russian tankers in question were carrying over 9,000 tons of heavy fuel oil when they were struck by a storm in the Kerch Strait, suffering heavy damage. Russian authorities say they have already removed close to 73,000 tons of oil-contaminated sand from beaches along Russia's coast. The total amount of polluted sand and soil currently stands at around 200,000 tons. Although Russian leadership has been saying the process has been going well, environmentalists and scientists alike have been criticizing the operation and have called both its methods and equipment inadequate.
The former deputy chief of Armenia's general staff, Tiran Karchatyan, has been arrested on charges of negligence relating to the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh war. This comes as the country has been embroiled in political tensions.
The lieutenant general is currently awaiting trial as state prosecutors say that he failed to perform his duties during the 44-day war between Armenia and Azerbaijan in 2020. Karchatyan has denied these accusations, and his legal team has already announced the intent to file an appeal. His arrest is seen as yet another sign of political blame being thrown about in Armenia after the country suffered several setbacks in campaigns to its rival and neighbor. The situation has put enormous strain on the relationship between Prime Minister Pashinyan and the country's military, as well as the PM's public perception at home. During the 2020 war, Azerbaijan had managed to take control of a chunk of Nagorno-Karabakh. Baku followed this victory up with a lightning-fast campaign in September 2023 when they took over the rest of the region.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.